Okay, let's start with our countdown before making an introduction here. And hello, everyone that joined us. We are here with Plan Buddies event about ESG. We'll speak about that after the countdown. So, hi, good evening, morning, afternoon for everyone who joined us. Veronica, thank you for joining, and hi for you as well. Everyone that is watching us live, you can use the comments. If you're on LinkedIn and can't comment, there is another link in our LinkedIn page to get in and literally write any comments. So, this evening, I have the pleasure to have both David and Chris with me. So we are having a truly international session because both Dave and Chris are from Australia and I'm here from Boston in the US. And we are going to speak today about ESG, environmental, social, and governance, and how does it mean, or what does it mean to FP&A, business planning and analysis professionals. Before I'm kind of introducing both Chris and Dave, I think I would have to say to everyone that is watching us, we know each other for ages. We all look very young, so I don't want to kind of say for how many years, but it's literally a couple of ages already. And I want also to start with the introduction and say that both of you are like FP&A professional. You have been working and still working a lot with the FP&A space, but a couple of months ago, you decided that you have to do something outside finance that can give new perspective to organizations about not just how to better perform, but literally doing that by taking better care on environment and society. And with that, maybe a quick segue for those who are listening to us, ESG is not a political topic. And for those who are thinking that ESG related to politics, let's just put politics aside and have this conversation more about how ESG is literally creating better value for the brand and for organizations. And I think that would be our main topic for today. And we're keeping that as an open conversation, so no tedious slides or shows. And I think with that kind of introduction, I'm super excited and thankful for having both of you here, David and Chris. And the floor is yours. I will be around just watching from the side.
Thanks, Liran. Hi, everyone. My name's Chris Mentor. I'm from Getting to Zero.
And hi, everyone. My name's David Upton. I'm from Getting to Zero. And as Liran mentioned, what we're really focusing on today is, after dealing with some of the fundamentals of what ESG is, we look at why it's important, what's changing in that, especially around some of the mandatory reporting. We then look at how this is impacting the CFO and FP&A's role, and some of the great areas that FP&A teams have existing skills that can really add value for organizations' ESG journey. We do consider some of the challenges and the solutions, and we have a little dive into some of the latest technology and the options for organizations as well. And then we open the floor up for questions to see how we can help answer anything that's come up. But perhaps just to set the stage, Chris, for the benefit of our audience, could you briefly describe what ESG is about?
Yeah, look, as Liran alluded to, ESG really stands for three major areas: environmental, social, and governance. And really, ESG is a reporting framework that allows the disclosure of a company's performance in the sustainability space. So if we think about environmental, the main topics you're thinking about there is carbon emissions and other things like water. And social really talks about workplace diversity, topics like modern slavery, for example. And governance focuses on ethical governance of an organization, community engagement, etc. And the other thing to think about is, what is ESG for? Who is it for? And primarily, the ESG reporting is for stakeholders such as investors, government bodies like regulators, but also for customers and employees of an organization to really understand what is the ESG strategy that the business actually has going forward. The last point, I suppose, is why. Why do we want to embark on an ESG journey? Why do we want to actually do this? Well, really, it's about assessing a company's commitment to sustainability and responsible practices to ensure that the world we have today is the world we have tomorrow.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That's a great overview. Just on one topic, and we could pick any of these, but when you mentioned environmental, you did describe carbon emissions, and I was wondering if you could just drill into that a little bit more, because it's pretty relevant in terms of some of the upcoming reporting, and explain that in some more detail.
Yeah, so carbon emissions are really covered by an umbrella term called greenhouse gas reporting. So this really looks at gases, greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and other fluorinated gases, for example. And what we do is that we measure these emissions from these particular gases, and we express them as what's called a CO2e, or CO2 equivalent, carbon dioxide equivalent. So what that enables us to do is to have a level playing field. It enables us to be able to report on a standardized basis and to be able to aggregate this data effectively. And really, the emissions component comes from all parts of a company's value chain. So not only thinking about emissions that a company might directly produce, but also emissions from the supply chain. So your suppliers into your business, but also your customers on the other side and the emissions that they have. And examples of emissions that you may have as an organization are things like transport, if you have cars or trucks in your business, electricity or heating or industrial processes that generate emissions based on the activity that the company does. So they're the types of things that form part of carbon emissions. And Dave, just to throw it back to you for a minute, why is ESG reporting such a big thing right now, and what's changing? Why is it happening now?
Yeah. So that's a great question, Chris. Traditionally, many organizations have picked up ESG reporting for their own reasons. They've looked at things like their customers, for example, and there's some great studies out there that show that nearly 80% of consumers remember companies with a strong purpose, for example. Other organizations have taken a cost and efficiency process, as Liran mentioned. I mean, if you can save costs in your business, then it's a bit of a no-brainer. And another study showed that over 60% of companies with product sustainability programs lowered logistics and supply chain costs. So there's some really good reasons there. And the third reason that companies have often embarked on this, and these are kind of basic business reasons, I suppose, outside of helping the environment, helping society, is just attracting and retaining talent. One study showed that 70% of employees consider a company's environmental record when they're deciding an employer. And if you look at Gen Z and the latest generation, these topics are really relevant to them. So that's some of the traditional reasons. I suppose what's changing and what's happening now is just the influx and the greater rigor around some of the mandatory reporting that's happening. Right. That's really what's driving the change. And we won't delve too deeply into that because that's a whole topic in itself. But there are three big areas, if you like. In the US, the SEC, Security and Exchanges Commission, just this month, on March the 6th, released new climate disclosure rules. So that's really around the carbon emissions that you were describing earlier, Chris. In Europe, they've got the ESRS, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, which also go into these topics. And probably the biggest for the rest of the world is the sister organization for IFRS. That's called ISSB. That's the International Sustainability Standards Board. They've released topics last year, and these are getting picked up by different jurisdictions. They can be everywhere from Singapore, Japan, Malaysia, even China, for example, has adopted some new standards. And say, just to pick our local example here in Australia, some of these are coming into law in this next financial year, which happens mid-year. And they're going to be rolled out right down to organizations over the next years where they're only up to like 100 employees. So it's really quite a big change for many organizations where traditionally large organizations might have had teams with capabilities around this. Now it's starting to impact much smaller organizations, and they have to consider these topics for the first time.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a good bridge to the CFO, because if you think of a large organization, they've got maybe dedicated CSO, Chief Sustainability Officer, dedicated sustainability team members. Mid-sized organizations really haven't had any practice in this as yet. And that's kind of the bridge to the CFO, because they're the traditional, as you'll probably discuss, the custodian of a lot of reporting. So maybe, Chris, you can explore why CFOs are really key to driving the ESG agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Dave, like you said, I mean, bigger organizations have bigger teams, of course. Medium-sized organizations typically have tighter, more efficient Department of Finance, for example, headed by a CFO. And really their job always has been to provide trusted, auditable, accurate information to the board and to external stakeholders for the business around financial numbers. So it makes complete sense. They've got the skills in this area to be able to leverage those skills for doing sustainability reporting as well. So it is a really good fit. Their team contains business analysts, financial controllers, and other people that can really, they know how to look at numbers and how to pull these numbers together. So CFOs are also highly experienced around that formalized communication process to the board, investors, etc., which you need for sustainability reporting. And really to be able to present a unified management pack where you have the financial reporting for a business combined with the ESG reporting is quite a powerful thing, because we can have it all in one place in one single presentation there. So Dave, I suppose following on from that, moving the strategic CFO view from an operational perspective, why is FP&A a natural fit for ESG reporting?
That's a good question, because it's all good to talk about some of those big items that you mentioned there, Chris, but when the rubber hits the road, you need teams to pick up things and own them operationally. And as Liran mentioned at the start, you know, we've had a long and storied history working very closely with FP&A teams, and I have a lot of respect for them in achieving, you know, great outcomes, if you like, with limited constraints, with limited resources, for example. And there are a range of reasons why FP&A really is a natural fit to support or even drive ESG reporting and some of the planning that can come with that. But I'll just pick three. The first is around data. You could call an FP&A person a data ninja. They're really skilled at identifying relevant metrics, so ESG metrics. They've got great skills in data collection, data reconciliation, data validation. And these are all essential skills if you want to be able to trust the numbers and be able to audit them with confidence. The second reason, along with data, is that they're very closely embedded into existing processes. So whether an organization's doing supply and operations planning, workforce planning, integrated business planning or budgeting, as well as the financial reporting and tracking performance, all these areas FP&A teams are traditionally very closely involved. So they can connect this ESG agenda, with risk assessment, and with some of those traditional processes. So if you really want to embed this in the organization rather than just externally report it, that's really important as well. And the third reason, and as I said, I could go on all day with these, is around the modeling and forecasting skills. So a lot of the new disclosure requirements aren't just about post facto, what happened in the past, what happened last year. They also want to know if you're driving, say, a net zero target, what's your transition plan? How are you going to be getting there? So FP&A's experience with financial modeling, with their ability of doing cost benefit analysis and doing scenario analysis are all extremely relevant skills in supporting an organization's ESG strategy.
That makes sense. And what are the specific challenges then that companies have for delivering ESG reporting?
Well, I suppose you could flip it around the other going, well, why did FP&A teams have to build all those capabilities in that? If we pick off data, for example, just like if you were doing an integrated business plan and you needed to pick drivers and assumptions from all around the business, ESG data is quite broad. So it can be quite fragmented, it can be complex, it can be time consuming to gather this data. And especially if you're doing this manually and using things like spreadsheets, that can increase the risk of errors. It can really hinder collaboration across teams. And a lot of what you need to do around ESG does require cross-functional collaboration. So that's challenge number one, the data. What that data issue does is really exacerbate the next challenge, which is around time. So a lot of these new disclosure reporting formats or timeframes are pretty tight. But if you're spending all your time reconciling data, working in spreadsheets, then you don't have a lot of time to add value in terms of insights. As we know, manual processes are inefficient and they reduce time for analysis. And the third reason, and I only just mentioned this before, but there's a long and storied history about all the traditional reporting ESG frameworks that have brought up to these big three that are happening between them at the moment. And whilst these are fairly harmonized in some respects, there are differences. So there's a lot of new regulation. It's not completely standardized. It's not completely transparent. And if you've got inconsistent reporting formats, that can make comparisons difficult. So for example, just to pick one, in the EU, they're focusing on something called double materiality. In the US with the SEC, for example, they've excluded what's called scope 3. So there are a lot of nuances that if you're a large organization, you really need to get across in understanding how to deliver trusted, complete ESG numbers that you can rely on. So there's some of the challenges. I think, Chris, let's flip it and then discuss perhaps how we can start to address some of these challenges inside the organization.
Yeah, so there's really, three key areas I believe that how you can address these challenges. So number one, the solution to a lot of problems in organizations is the same solution here, and that's the people. The people that you have running the show in terms of the reporting processes are key. Making sure that you've got the right people in the right positions. So whether they are ESG controllers, carbon accountants, or even your existing team, ensuring that they've got the skill sets and the ability to build these models or actually get the data for a model that they may have to actually produce the reporting. That is really super important. So making sure the right people are in the right roles for actually addressing these challenges. The second point is around automation and data management systems. So depending on the size, the complexity, and the type of organization you're in, there are many different tools or processes out there that you can actually use to manage your ESG reporting. But really the key thing is to think about how can we streamline our data collection, our data cleansing, our reporting, just in the same way. For example, you might need calculations to do, your sales plan with quantity and price. you're going to need activities of like distance driven of vehicles and vehicle by emission factors, etc. Different drivers to actually build out your ESG model. So really, how do I streamline that process? How do I make it easy for data collection, calculation, and processing? And really that comes down to some technology-enabled solutions. So whether I'm using Excel to do my model, or whether I'm using my ERP or some other solution, think about how we can leverage off what we've got in our organization to improve the efficiency and generate those insights. Okay. And this is a really big topic in this area, and there's a lot of developments that are happening in this space around that automation and data management systems. The third thing that really helps, and as you've spoken to Dave, that's coming this year, is really those standardized global frameworks. So up until now, there's been a lot of fragmented standards around the world. And especially for large multinationals, it's been a nightmare because every country has had quite different ways of treating ESG reporting. Now it's far more standardized across major regions of the world. So it enables the harmonization of that reporting out of a single finance department, for example, of producing the information that's required.
Yeah, it does sound, when you talk about some of that harmonization and the changes, that change management, especially if bringing new roles and people into the team, change management is quite key as well. But let's perhaps pick up that second point you mentioned about data management systems and automation, and look a bit more about the technology. Should we stick with Excel, or should we consider more advanced tools? What are some of our options here?
Yeah, well, like I said, it really does depend on the size and the complexity of your organization. So if you're a business where you can run everything in an Excel spreadsheet, maybe an Excel model for ESG reporting might be good enough. But if you've got any sort of size or complexity at all, like a medium size or a large business, then you really need to think about how I can manage the data more effectively, because the volumes of data will be overwhelming. So the first point is really to think about, what do we use internally for our financial reporting, for our financial planning? Maybe there is a possibility of leveraging off these types of tools. So for example, your organization may have an enterprise performance management tool, whether it's SAP Analytics Cloud, Power BI, TM1, Anaplan, Jedox, Pigment, for example. All these tools offer the ability of data ingestion, calculation, and presentation. So these tools enable you to aggregate and present your data very effectively and to automate that process. So on the plus side here, we can leverage an existing investment the organization may have already made in an enterprise performance management tool. We can connect to an existing process workflow of a monthly reporting cycle that's already in place. And your team has experience with this technology. So the technology jump is pretty small. It's pretty easy to do. And you've got those in-house skills. But you also must consider, if you're going to do something like that, you will have to build your own. Typically, you may have to build your own ESG model from scratch in that tool. Although some vendors offer things like modules or models or accelerators, which may contain an ESG model that you could plug into your TM1 or your Jedox or your Anaplan or your Pigment, for example. But you need to consider which approach or which direction you'll take in terms of putting a model together.
Yeah, that's some really good points, Chris. And, certainly the idea of connecting it to existing processes makes a lot of sense. As you mentioned, though, one of the challenges can just be you're embarking on a journey on an area that you don't have any prior experience in. And another option to consider is implementing cloud-based accounting, carbon accounting tools, or dedicated emissions and disclosure management platforms. So These really range from pure play carbon accounting tools on one side, like there's a local one in Australia called Someday, but then you've got focus vendors. So people like Plan A, Persephone, NetNada. They also provide broader ESG reporting. You also have larger vendor options. So there's the Microsoft Sustainability Cloud, there's the Net Zero Cloud by Salesforce, or the IBM Environmental Intelligence Suite. There really is no lack of technology that can support you in this journey. And so there are definitely some pluses to consider here. They can include, say, just standard disclosure formats. So if the disclosure standards are changing, they can keep you up to date with that. They can also include libraries. So these might be the emission factors you need for climate reporting. They can embed good practice. And even in their implementation teams, they might be having sustainability experts as well. So they're not just coming in to technically implement what you want, but they can help you do these types of things. They may also have the facility of benchmarking against peers. So there are a lot of benefits from these types of tools. On the flip side, some considerations is that it's another tool. So if you do, as Chris mentioned, have existing investments and tools embedded across your business, do you want another tool that's sitting outside of that, that's not connected to that? So that's something strongly to consider. And another thing to consider is if they really take that corporate disclosure type of approach, they really may be operating at an entity level, at a corporate level, rather than an operational level. So they might help the disclosure, but if you really want to consider implementing, say, a net zero strategy, then that's a strategy that your organization needs to pick up and run with. And a lot of that is about feedback loops at an operational level. So maybe your procurement team, for example, will need visibility on some of the carbon emissions of their suppliers when they're making those decisions. These types of tools sit at a corporate level, so they're not necessarily going to help you with those types of operational processes where you can really embed it.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, that really brings us to a third option in terms of looking at technology to assist in putting together these models, is really looking at your underlying ERP. Why would we do that in terms of ESG? Well, the reason why you'd think about it is because the very nature of ESG reporting is very transactional based. So you have to get down to very specific detail in individual transactions to parse out the information you need for your reporting. And that's one thing ERPs do very well, is transactional level style reporting and data entry. So whether your organization is running Dynamics 365 or Xero, if you're a SMB, or QuickBooks in America, or SAP Sustainability Footprint Management, these tools are really operating at a very low level, and a lot of them have modules now that you can plug in to be able to do sustainability reporting at that transactional level, cradle to gate footprint calculations. So it is very powerful to be able to actually pull that data at the absolute lowest level. Some of the considerations, though, you've got to think about is that some of these tools really are reporting only. So it's a stake in the ground, looking for at a particular period of time you want to do your reporting. They might not necessarily help you with the planning side of things, to forward looking, or what if scenarios type things. If we change this in our organization, how will that affect our carbon footprint on the other side? So we need to think about that. It still may require additional subledgers or information not captured in these platforms. So the thing with sustainability reporting is that some of this information is outside of your organization, even outside of your control completely. It's information coming from your supplier or from your customer. So even if you use a transactional level system, there still might be additional information you're going to have to pull outside.
That makes a lot of sense, Chris. I mean, you're right on one level. Carbon accounting is a lot like cost accounting. There are some nuances different nuances, but it does lend itself to a lot of what's happening already in an ERP level or transactional level system. So that really concludes the chat between Chris and I, and I'd like to open up the floor to questions if possible. And maybe Liran, oh, hi, you're back. If there are any questions, maybe you could throw it at us and see if we can do our best to pick it up and run with it.
Liran, you're on mute, I think.
You know, in every webinar, someone needs to be on mute, so I'm happy that I was the one who did it this time. Anyhow, so before we go to the questions, by the way, anyone who listening either on the LinkedIn platform or on the StreamYard platform, you can post some questions. I see Carolina already posted. We'll get into the question in a moment. But I did want to say something. I took some notes, right? People have not been seeing me. And during this fascinating presentation, I want to go back into the topic and into planned bodies. Why are we doing that in that sense of FP&A, and why we named that this session as the pivotal role of FP&A in the ESG evolution. And I think you literally checked all the boxes, right? So as FP&A professional, we are in charge of reporting on the company's value. We are in charge on looking into the data and provide insight and create reports, whether those are more managerial reports or regulatory reports. And sometimes in order to do that, we need tools, and we always have, I love the question, right? Do you need a specific tool or a spreadsheet, right? We always have those conversations with customers, with ourselves, and so on. So I think you literally checked all the boxes that explain everyone why FP&A is the place to manage this huge initiative of ESG that is literally not just how to be more friendly with society and environment, but also making sure you are standing behind the governmental requirements and regulatory requirements, as well as helping the environment and the company to have a greater value. With that, I have questions for you as well, but Carolina was asking a question. Let me put it in for a moment. So now everyone can see this question as well. How important do you think it is, the company culture toward measuring these indicators? How harmful or beneficial can this be to the way the employee view the company culture? Which, I have an answer, but I'm not an expert, so I keep it with you.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to hear your perspective too, Liran, because I think this is quite a fundamental question. The old adage is, what gets measured gets managed in an organization. And we really do know that if you focus on specific measurements, it can distort behavior, because people focus on certain things that are visible to them. Maybe it comes up on a weekly KPI, for example, as red. So that incentivizes them to focus on it. On the other side, there might be things that are equally or even more important that they just don't have those feedback loops, so they're not prioritizing. So definitely that choice of which metrics that you choose is very important. I think there are, when you delve into metrics, there is a lot of supporting information out there. So the International Accounting Standards Board, for example, provides sector-by-sector metrics. And these are just starting points that could be relevant to your particular organization. And while some of them, especially say around the social, can be quite nuanced, other ones like the environmental really can be a bit of a no-brainer. If you're Pepsi, for example, and you depend on the local water quality to be able to produce your soft drink in a particular community, because typically the water is using local water, and then it's sold back to the local consumers. If you're not considering your impact on that water consumption, then that's got a potential detriment for your business in the long term. So a lot of this stuff is really good business sense. And as Liran said at the beginning, you don't have to really go to the sort of the political side of things. You can just pair it back to really business fundamentals. And it's quite practical to consider some of these things.
And Carolina's point, really, she talks about culture, like the impact of culture. And I think it's super important when you're introducing ESG reporting to consider the company culture. What is the reason for the company's existence? What do people love about the company? Why they want to be there? And making sure that the introduction of ESG is aligned to that. So, for example, you gave a great example, Dave, about the about soft drink, and I suppose it's really, for example, I've had conversations with people about worrying about the fact that it seems too like environmental and greeny orientated style of management. And really, one of the biggest things that companies get out of ESG reporting is efficiency, and reduction of cost, because we're looking at different ways, for example, of producing energy, which in effect reduces emissions, which in effect makes our costs less. So there is different ways of framing the ESG question, and in terms of introducing that to the business. So I think understanding the company's culture and how it works is crucial when you're implementing something like this.
And just really, when you're considering implementing any strategy in an organization, it can be anything. Like, how do you drive culture? How do you embed it in the culture? Well, what doesn't necessarily work well is to consider this ESG as kind of like the people going around with a stick. So like an audit team who are just running around, and people have to comply with these different things. If you really want to get people to live and make changes, then you might need to make it part of a team's KPI. Maybe it's the sales team or the procurement metrics. Maybe there's a variable incentive connected to it. As I mentioned, you need to roll out anything to do with strategy and consider the implications very carefully. But there are a lot of change management tools out there that can really help organizations do this in a smooth and effective way, and also really learn from it. Because when you're implementing any kind of strategy, you don't necessarily get it perfectly right on day one. And it needs some incremental iteration for you to really achieve it. But Liran, I know you do have a perspective on this. I really would love to hear what your view is as well.
Well, yeah, thank you. I think the first piece is very much related to what you mentioned about how you implement strategy in general within an organization. And if I need to advise a CEO or a CFO about implementing ESG and how to make it align with the culture, probably the first thing I would say, is it like a performance-driven organization? Do we have that alignment with the employees that whatever we are measuring in the organization is literally to create a performance-driven organization? Are we making sure that people in the organization understand that whatever we're doing is to create a better value for the company? So that's, to me, the starting point. Now, to Carolina's question, if we are not taking that as the mindset, if we are not explaining that the ESG is being implemented not because it's a political opinion, but it can save money or drive efficiency to the company or create maybe higher bonuses or better social activities planned to the employees. If we are not going that through the positivity it brings, but we're taking that into those narrow sides of political opinion, that's where a problem is. But if we are explaining this is part of our organizational motion to be more effective, to be more responsible, to generate higher value, to save money, to save cost, and to help, the environmental is part of that, and be in compliance, I think this is something that everyone should like about. By nature, I think it can be very attractive with that explanation, both for the employees that are value-driven, as well as for those who are literally more like the Gen Z that want to see with each and every organization that sort of a nice motion, right? And we spoke about it, Dave, right, just before we started this conversation, that it can even bring more value, that it will bring even more people and more kind of new blood to the organization.
Yeah.
And we have Veronique that is kind of in agreement with that. And Carolina, I really love your comment. It's all about storytelling and the way we present, of course. And we'll make sure to have in our next sessions more storytelling conversations as well.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So I have two quick questions. We're a little bit over time, but it seems that everyone is enjoying it. So why not staying a couple of more hours? No, just kidding. No worries. Just a few more moments. So two questions, David and Chris. The first one is really more related for those who are listening to us and wondering how to start ESG motion with the organization and to create value through ESG, how we start. And the second one, I will ask those two questions together. Did you enjoy this meeting and conversation?
Yeah.
Dave, do you want me to start?
Yep.
Yeah. So really, how do companies get started? Well, I suppose it is. First thing is maybe educating yourself a little bit more about what ESG is, and in your neck of the woods, what the regulations and requirements are for actual management. The second point then is to maybe engage a company to assist you on that journey, especially if you don't actually have that knowledge internally, to take you through about what's actually required and to help actually make those strategic decisions about what you want to be able to do internally, the tools you want to use, the automation you want to bring to the process, who is responsible in the organization for these things, etc. So it is really at the starting point is really that conversation, bringing that conversation to the CFO, to the CEO in the organization to say, this is something we need to do, and then engaging the right people internally and externally to help you on that journey.
Yeah. No, Chris, you're right. It can be difficult in any organization to embark on something new. It's not necessarily just how to build another report. So yes, you may need to go put teams on training. You need to hire new resources, but in terms of really understanding where you're at, getting external consultants in just at the start can at least get you to understand what the good practice are, what the gotchas are, and perhaps understand what your peers are doing as well in your sector. So you can bring in some of that strategic approach there and not just have a knee-jerk reaction to like, oh, we've got new reporting standards, but how can we use this as an opportunity for value creation in the organization as well? And really, how might our strategy around ESG unfold over the next 3, 5, or 10 years? So you can take a big picture attitude to this, even if you're focusing on some of the day-to-day operational activities.
Awesome. Chris, David, again, thank you so much for this exciting conversation. Anyone who joined us, we will have this recorded on Plan Buddies. We have a couple of exciting events coming up in the next couple of weeks. So keep updates on LinkedIn page, and of course, try join our community at planbuddies.com. Anyone who join and post thank you and questions and interactions, appreciate your involvement, and I hope that everyone in this call was learning at least the same as I was able to get new ideas here. So again, thank you everyone. Have a great day for you in Australia. A good evening for everyone here in the US, and probably good night for our colleagues in Europe and other regions. So thank you again.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you,
so
everyone.
much, Liran.
Thank you.
If anyone's interested in discussing any more, do feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. If anything, you've got particular questions around your organization or how do you start your journey. I mean, we are getting to zero, and we do work with companies to make that process of collecting, reporting, sharing emissions and ESG as simple as possible. So we really thank you for your attendance today.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.
See you. Bye.